What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over something fun and enjoyable, and that is the character select screen. We're going to add some enhancements and some improvements to it. So in the past, we were able to go with player 1 and player 2 using either keyboard or controller, or some mix of the two. Select our characters, they show up on the screen, and we can even change our outfits. All that dictates how our characters will show up in the game. Well, there are a few additional things we can add, such as the timer up at the top. And also, we can actually, if I replay this again, I can show you something else that I've added called locking in the players. So we've selected the characters, but in the past we were still able to move around with our keys or select them with our mouse or our controller, and we don't want to be able to do that once we've locked in our character here. We should be able to press a button, unlock our character, and then go and select the new character that we want to be. But until that point, we should be locked in. We should not be able to move our selectors. Doing that will allow us to lock it in for player 1 and player 2 to see. It won't mess with the actual character that's being displayed on the screen if you're navigating, one character at a time. It'll just free up a lot of functionality that we don't want to have to set up. It should kind of come automatically by blocking the player's input from moving from selection to selection when they've already confirmed their character and selected the character. Notice they could still change their outfit while they were doing that. And then we'll be covering this today, but I'll actually even be going over the stage select screen with some improvements as well. Now, I don't have player 2 having any real functionality here. I do allow them to move back and forth because in a lot of games, player 2 can either, offer up where they would want to play on for the stage, or it can be random between player 1 and player 2. Right now, player 1 dictates everything when it comes to the stage, so I haven't set up that player 2 logic, but you can copy over everything from the locking in from the character select screen. That will work here, and we're also going to show you the timer. I'm going to do a little bit of live coding to make the timer work on this stage as well. So, we're going to go ahead and get started, but before we do, I'm going to leave this iCard right here in the top right corner. This is the playlist to all the fighting game tutorial episodes. I'll show you everything we've done to get to this point, and it'll be kept up to date, so any episode released after this one will also be in that playlist. You can go ahead and click on that to check them out and see if this is the right playlist for you. Otherwise, I'll link this right here, which is where we pretty much maximized the controls and the inputs on our character select and stage select screens. We're able to navigate them fully to our liking now. We just want to make sure that the actual functionality for when the player can control them and what we expect to happen, say when the timer runs out, all works. Alright. So, let's get started today. This is going to be all in the blueprints and the widgets, and it's specifically going to be in the character select screen and the level select screen, or the character select and the stage select, whatever you have called them. There's quite a bit of things we can actually do in today's episode to make all this stuff work, and it can be very, very heavily modified because there are seriously probably tens if not hundreds of ways that you could do these different things for aesthetics, for the actual feel of the game. So I'm going to give you some examples and show you how you can do certain things, and then you can implement it how you would like. Let's start with the character select screen, and let's go over locking in characters. It's a small detail, but being able to lock in a character, that way the player specifically has to back out of that character if they want to switch, is useful. In my opinion, it also feels better. That way, if you're touching the keyboard or your controller, you're not moving characters and then, oh, I don't know what character I am. Locking it in makes it so much easier. So the way we're going to do this is actually pretty simple. All we need are two booleans, is P1 locked in and is P2 locked in. Basically, we're determining, are these characters locked in by the respective player, player 1 and player 2. So add a variable, set its type to be boolean for each of these. We have to think about where we're going to set it and where we're going to need to use it. So first things first, where are we going to set it? Well, the term I'm using here, locked in, basically means I've confirmed my selection. We already have a confirmed selection. It's just that the confirmed selection, all it does is it sets the variable for the code and for the blueprint so we know what character to spawn when we're in the game. And it does display the character animation as well. So when I'm in here, I do display the mutant animation. There's a sound effect, so we know that we've confirmed this character. However, now, I want to stop the player from being able to move back and forth until they've manually taken back their selection. So let's go to confirm selection to confirm it, and we'll go to the other places we need it afterward. So here's confirm selection, and you can see that this ugly code is what we've changed here, and I'm going to explain why. So in confirm selection, we make sure our stage select screen is not up. Since both these widgets are present and focus off of each other, this was here to make sure that we did not press anything on the wrong widget, the non-focused widget. Then we were going into switch statement to see what player it was, player 1 or player 2. And we were doing this check here. Confirm P1 selection equals the selection coming into confirm selection false. If it's false, it goes and sets it. The reason I was doing that logic is because I did not want the players to be able to spam, say, the mutant. So I didn't want to be able to keep pressing the confirm button and keep playing the mutant's animation over and over again. Now, we didn't have a method of locking the characters in, so we confirmed it, we set it, and that was it. This was the only way I could think of to do it with that old method. But now we can get rid of these nodes. The confirm P1 selection equals the selection from confirm selection and the branch that goes along with it for both player 1 and player 2. And we can instead replace it with this much simpler logic, simpler and cleaner. And that's this right here. All right. And now it looks much nicer. So what we're going to check is actually, is P1 locked in? If they're not locked in, then we confirm the selection with the selection coming into this function. This also means that if player 1's not locked in, it will go and trigger the animations for the characters. This is incredibly useful because this means that we don't have to do any checks to see what the character already was or anything ugly like that. We can simply just check this boolean and say, oh, they're not already locked in, so now we're going to lock them in. So that branch can be used to clean up that section of the code and actually make it a little bit more efficient as well. And then we are going to actually set what character, or really what player, is locked in once we know that they are locked in. You could do it immediately after setting the selection integer here. I did it toward the end of the branched logic since the logic is different between player 1 and player 2. I did it toward the very end here. But you could do it wherever you want, just as long as it's after it has actually been confirmed, and you know that that's going to be set. And we're literally just going to set P1 and P2 locked in to be true, depending on if it's player 1 or player 2. Very simple. Okay? And then one of the main areas that we need to make sure that actually listens to these rules is the move selection function. If we go into move selection, without going into all the individual logic we had because we have several episodes on it, basically we press an input, the game determines where the selector for the player should end up after that input has been pressed, and then it moves it to that spot. Well, now we want to make sure that no movement can occur if these players are locked in. So all I did was move everything over. I haven't changed any of this. Everything after the switch statement here, I moved over, just like that, brought it over to the right, and I've added these two branches in here. So for player 1, which is index 0, and default, I have it defaulting to player 1. I go to the top, and player 2, I go to the bottom, and it's as simple as, is P1 locked in, branch, and if it's false, then they can move. So basically, if they're locked in, they can't move their selection. That's all we're doing here. Make sure you do it for P1 and then for P2. And again, nothing else has to change. You can see what I have right there. It's all the same stuff. Okay. So very simple fixes there, or updates really, but they can be useful. Now here's something I haven't done, but I wanted to show you guys that you could do if you like this. So locking in is cool, and I think it makes the game cleaner, like I said earlier, but it can have a functional purpose as well. So when we go into the game right now, I go into versus. I do have default characters set up, which is defaulting to the mutant, because I am on, this is debug, right? I want to be able to get into the game very quickly, perhaps play as the mutant. So I may just do that and then come into my stage, and I expect that I'll be the mutant. See, I didn't select a character, but I'm still the mutant. So that's really a debug thing and a development thing to save time, so I don't have to go pick my character every time. You'll notice most of the time when I make these episodes, I do go and pick my characters because it looks better and it looks nicer than not displaying the characters, not picking the specific stage, that sort of thing. However, for testing and development purposes, I don't care about that. I don't care if the characters are picked or not. I just want to hop into what I want to test, right? However, thinking ahead, you may want to, let's play this one more time, you may want to not be able to go to the next section until both characters have picked. A lot of fighting games are like this. There are technically, I know for sure there are some where you can, if the characters don't pick, one character can force, usually player one can force the screen to go to the next one, and the other player will just have a random character assigned to them. But even that, you see that they have to be forced to do it. So really, when both players lock in here, say they've chosen their outfits, any other thing, if there's fighting styles, really what could happen is you could focus this button here with either our custom input logic that we have that allows us to focus it, or we could press it with the mouse, whatever, but we could set it up so that we could not go to the next area unless both characters are locked in. If you want to set that up, it's very simple, so I can get that ready for you. Basically, here's what you do. We have this on press continue button, that's for the mouse, and we have the go to level select event, which is what gets called if you select it through the proceed P1 input action, which is an input action that we've bound to the keyboard and buttons on a controller that we can press, such as start, to just basically skip that screen. So once this event gets called, it does all the logic necessary to open up the stage selection screen. Well, if you wanted to check, just all you would have to do, if you wanted to make it to where both players had to be locked in, you could either make a new function, and I think that's what we'll do, because I could see this being useful, called are both players locked in. Okay? We're going to add an output parameter here, Boolean. We'll call it both locked in as the return. And it's pretty simple. All we're going to do is determine what we want the logic to be here to give this a true or false result. So for both players to be locked in, it's incredibly simple. We have to get P1 locked in, get P2 locked in, okay, and Boolean, and we return this directly into the return node. So what we're doing is we're saying if this and this is true, then this returns true. Otherwise, it's going to return false, because if player 1's not locked in, well, this isn't true. If player 2's not locked in, this isn't true. So we can make this small little function here, and then you could call this function. When we know we want to go to the stage selection, we check are both players locked in. Let's make sure that's nice and neat. Let's move this over a little bit more. And you could do a branch, just like that. And only if it's true do you go to the next section. And there you go. So now if I try and go in here, let's say I go into my game and I select one character, player 2 is not selected. I actually can't go to my next screen, clicking the button or pressing the appropriate key. But say I select both characters. Well, now I can. So this can require you to have both players locked in before going to the next screen. Definitely could be useful in the future. I'll keep it. I'm going to skip it for now, or just leave it down here for now, because again, I want the ability to not have to lock them in for the purposes of development. It's much faster for me not to have to do that every time. So I'm leaving it out, but if you want to play around with that and implement some things for that, there you go. There's a nice little function you can use. All right. Now, let's actually go to this next. So there is something minor, but something we never actually set up, and that's the ability for player 2 to use the return action. So we have right here return P1, which is called return to main menu, and basically it goes into this logic, which we'll be editing today, so don't worry, I'll get into this. But basically it's going to say, oh, the player is trying to return from the character select screen, they're trying to go back to the main menu. Well, we should also have the equal button here for return P2 because we want player 2 to be able to back out of their selection now. Before, it was just player 1. Once they press this button, we exit the menu. But now, we have to, if we press this button, we want to be able to reset the locked in variable. And then if the characters are not locked in by the players, then we want to return to the main menu. So, quick little note here, just because we hadn't done this before, I'd recommend adding these if you don't already have them. I actually did not because we did not use them, but I've added a proceed P2 and a return P2. Now, proceed P2 would be if the player 2 has any sort of logic where they can go to the stage selection screen from the character selection screen. Again, I don't have that set up to do that, and actually I don't intend to, because I think in this sense right here, it should be player 1 that determines that. When you get into multiplayer and things, it will probably be the host that determines that, or a randomly assigned player. But either way, it won't be P2 in this case, because this P2 here is for local instances where both players are on the same controller or input device, like a keyboard. We have the other controller logic working for both players, and it's different than this. So this is mainly for, in fact, this is only for 2 players on 1 input device. So I'm not even using that one right now. But return P2 I am going to use, since I do a lot of my playing on the keyboard. And this will allow player 2 to unlock their selection, or to back out of their character that they selected. Or same with the stage that they selected, if that becomes relevant. So I just add another one here, another input action. And then once you do that, you can do the same thing we've done for all of our other input actions on this widget. Basically, you do a listen for input action. And then you will type in the action name, the name of the action, which is return P2. We want it to be pressed. It doesn't have to consume in this case. And then we drag off the callback and type add custom event. Once you do that, you'll get one of these nodes. I called it P2 back. When this happens, I just set is P2 locked into false. It really doesn't matter if they were locked in previously or not. I'm not allowing player 2 to exit the character select menu to return to the main menu. So at this point, I'm just setting P2 locked in to be false. That way they can move about freely. And I do play a sound effect because I do think that a sound effect is relevant on widgets when pretty much any action is being performed by the player. So backing out of a confirmed selection should play a sound, but that's up to you if you want to do that. Now we have to update our return to main menu and unpressed back button events as well. So that was the player 2 logic, which is simpler, and we already had a lot of this in the player 1 logic. Like all this is to return to the main menu, and this is to close the stage selection screen, things like that. But we have to think about this now with this locked in variable in mind. So first of all, I don't really like that this is called return to main menu anymore. That's what we called it because that's what I did at first, but then we kept adding to it. So let's just say P1 back. Since we called this P2 back, this is when player 1 presses the back button, essentially. Okay. And so now, what we have to do is if the stage selection screen is up, the logic there is fine. We don't want anything on the character select screen being edited here, so we can ignore this part. But the false of this branch was going into this right here, where it would play the sound effect, create the main menu widget, and it would actually remove the character select screen widget. It would basically destroy it altogether. However, what we should be doing now is if the stage select screen is not up, false, then we need to check something else too. Remember, we don't want to be able to go back to our main menu and exit the character select screen if player 1 is locked in. When they press the back button, it should not automatically exit to the main menu. It should first remove their confirmed selection, and then if they press it when there is no confirmed selection, it can return to the main menu. So to do this, very simple. I check, is P1 locked in? If it is, I reset it, just like we did here. Same thing for P2 back. I even play my sound effect, same way we did it there. But if it's not locked in, then we return to the main menu. Okay. So pretty simple changes here, but they can make a huge difference because they're all minor changes that will be, you know, the players will use them every single time when selecting characters. So feel free to do all of that for the stage selection or the level select screen as well if you'd like. I'm not going to do that because as soon as I press the button, it loads into the game right now. And if we don't have any sort of, you know, transition between them, then it's not really necessary for them to lock in. And if player 2 doesn't have input, they also don't really have to lock in. So it's up to you. Do whatever you'd like with that, but now you should know how. The other thing I'd like to go over is the timer. So there's a timer up top, and it's counting down. As you can see, every second it loses some of its time. And once it hits 0, what I actually want it to do, I don't have all of the visuals here set up for this episode because I have another episode planned to make these screens even nicer to look at. It'll be strictly like a visual thing and an animation thing, and we'll be covering it there. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to pick a random character for all the non-locked in players and then go to the level select screen. You can always press back to re-trigger this. You notice there is an issue with the background where the background doesn't become visible. We'll be fixing that as well, so ignore that for now. But you can see I can press back and go to the character select screen, and then I can still move about freely, whatever it is, and make my selections. However, that's essentially the flow here. We want to decrease from this remaining selection time every frame, or really just every update. And we want to determine how much time is left on the timer, and once it goes below 0, we're going to call timer expired, which is then going to perform all the logic we need to, you know, do whatever it is we want to do. If we select, we could select the characters, we could select the character that the players are highlighted over with their selectors. We could call a random function to randomly select the character. So there's a lot of options here. Okay, so in event tick, you'll probably notice that we have this stuff here, this player 2 player controller and all these functions for them. These guys right here, all these functions, what they are, they're all for our specific and special case where if we have one keyboard and one controller, make sure that they can still work. It is a hack, and really it's just for development. There is some use to it for player 1 and player 2 both on the controller on the same game, but there are other ways around it. My point being, all this, you can ignore this for now, don't worry about it. We have it plugged in and we've used it in the past, so you may have it in your game. But if you don't worry about adding any of this. It's specifically for controller and some special cases we talked about in other episodes. What I did is I moved it all out of the way. I moved it all to the right, and this is the logic that we need to do today. So you probably have event tick, but if you don't, you can search for it, just like that. And you want to bring this up. So on tick of this widget, we're going to do this logic. So every update, essentially, we're doing this. All right. So let's get our widgets ready with what we need. We need a text, literally called text in the widget. You can bring it into the game or into the widget here wherever you want by dragging it and dropping. I already have one, so I'm not going to do that. But I have my box here, and it is anchored to the top middle. I've given it a position of 20, so it's a little bit below the top. And I've hit bind. I know mine says the name of the binding, but yours will say add binding or create binding. And you're going to create a new binding, clicking this little drop down. And you're going to come into the graph. It'll automatically bring you to the graph once you hit that button. And you'll get something like this, and it'll have a return node. What you need to do is rename this to whatever you want, or you can keep the default name. I called it get remaining selection time. And we need a variable that can keep track of this, because this is the display for, this text is the display for the users, but this isn't the variable that's being internally kept. We're going to keep a float value for that. So make a new variable right here. Make sure the type is a float, and I've called it remaining selection time, whatever you want, remaining screen time, time left on character select, doesn't matter. That's going to be the time that's left until that timer up top runs out. So this is our binding, and basically we're going to use this variable here to automatically display that to this text that we put here. So very simply done. We bring our float into the widget. We get it. So we have our remaining selection time. I do truncate because I don't want to show it as a float. I want to show it as an integer. And I put toText integer. That way it can easily go into the return node here. Very, very simple. Once you do this, you may not see anything at all, depending on if you manually typed text in here or not. But one quick way to do it, if you click on remaining selection time, you can set a default value. This will probably be determined later in the settings, or maybe we will have a global default value to say character select is always 30 seconds long. Whatever. But I've just assigned a default value of 30 seconds here. All right. And now when you play your game, you should actually see this without having to do anything else. You should see that it says 30 up here. It won't be counting down yet. Now we're going to go back to tick, and we're going to make it actually count down. You may know how to do this. We've done this for things like our game mode. It's very simple, but here's how you can do it again. Basically, tick gets called every update, but it does have this in delta time that realizes how much real time has passed since the last tick. So if you are constantly checking against this value, you will be able to record in real time how much time has passed. And that's exactly what we want to steal from our remaining selection time here. So I grab my remaining selection time variable again. I do minus or hyphen for float minus float, and I pass in delta time. Then I simply set remaining selection time back to that value, meaning that this value minus the delta time is equal to the new value that is remaining. Then after that, I simply check if this value is greater than float, and I leave it at 0.0. Meaning if it's greater than 0.0, we're going to just decrease from it and good to go. But if it's not, we're going to call timer expired. This is a new function that I made. So if you go into your functions area, plus function, you'll make a new one. I called mine timer expired. If I go into timer expired, this is all it looks like. It's pretty simple. I was testing a shorter time. That way I could debug a little bit faster. But, okay, so timer expired. We have two checks here. Basically, we're checking if player 1 is locked in and if player 2 is locked in, because we're going to want to do the logic for both of them. So in this case, what I've decided to do is choose a random character. So a random character for player 1 and player 2 if they're not locked in. If they are locked in, we don't need a new player, or we don't need a new character for them. But if they haven't locked in, the time ran out, we're just assigning them a random character. So the way we do this is pretty easy. Basically, I check is P1 locked in, branch. If they are not locked in, we're going to choose the random character. This is where you would do your logic if you wanted to, say, for example, choose the character the player was hovering with their selector. Then you could do that here as well. So we have a choose random character function that we made. We did it a little bit strangely because we actually passed in the game instance ref, which isn't required here. We're like, why would we do that? We have a game instance ref. There was a reason for it at the time, just because it was more convenient for us. But feel free to go into this function and just get the game instance in here and use it. Up to you if you'd rather do that or pass it in. It doesn't really matter. It just might be a little bit weird or ugly to do it this way. But I just left it since I didn't want to change that function if we didn't have to. Okay, so I just choose random character, and then literally I was getting my game instance ref like this and passing it in. At this point, it should be valid. If the timer is expired and the game instance is invalid, it will probably never be valid, which means there's a bigger issue, and it's not an issue with timing. If player 1 is not locked in, then we're doing this on player index 0. It should then go to the next iteration. So whether they were locked in or not, we have to then check player 2. If they're not locked in, we have to choose random character with player index of 1. Player index 1 is player 2, player index 0 is player 1. Then regardless if player 2 is locked in or not, we need to go to the level select. And then I'm resetting the remaining selection time here, because at this point, we don't want to keep calling tick. Regardless, even if this isn't being focused because the level select is up, we do want to reset the time. So if the players decide to go back to the character selection screen from the stage selection screen, the timer is reset. You don't want it to be 0. First of all, it would automatically trigger this logic again, and then you would just go straight back to the stage select. And you don't want it to be a different value than what you expect, like 2 seconds. Well, maybe I want more than 2 seconds if I return to my character select. So I'm just resetting it to my default value. And just make sure you call this. I know we made the function, but make sure you do actually add it here in event tick and call it. I also wanted to mention how we can fix up our background on our character select screen. So basically all this logic here in event construct for the character select screen widget, this is what dictates what the character select screen background will be. I copied all this and I put it in a new function called display background. Pasted it all in there. I can then use the new function instead of this logic in event construct. I don't need anything in this completed section anymore, as you can see. Then, once this is done, all we have to do is add this when we return from the stage select screen to the character select screen. We want to call this same function now. So if I scroll over to our back button where we check and see if the stage select screen is up with this boolean here, we now want to add this display background to the top branch you see here where we set the visibility of the character select screen back to true. We want to then call the display background. And once we test this out, you'll see everything works as intended. So now we're looking pretty good. Now we actually have a working timer that performs logic, and we'll actually go to the level select screen when it runs out, so it actually has a purpose. The level / stage select screen can have the same logic applied to it for almost all this stuff. Again, I'm not really going to do that, but what I am going to do it for is the timer. So you can watch me do it in real time, just in case anything didn't click. Will be done in very, very short amount of time. But just so you can get an idea of the workflow again, we're going to call this remaining selection time. This is going to be a float. I do like to put them in order when possible. So I put it above my integers, or below my integers. And then we're actually going to copy this flat out, not going to lie, because I don't see any reason not to. Just going to pull this guy back a little bit. Straighten these guys up. Bring this through here. Something like that is probably fine. And then we need to make a timer expired function. Do note that I have already put my text on this widget, so I'm not going to be doing that, but we will need to bind it still. Let's make timer expired. Going to call this guy, and then let's bind our timer. I'm going to create a new binding. We're going to copy pretty much everything from the character select because it's really very, very similar logic for the binding here. There we go, something like that. And now we have to cover timer expired. So for this, it could be a little bit different, but since I don't care about P1 and P2, and I really just care about what happens when this expires, I'm going to select a random stage. Literally. We also need to make sure that we set our value to have a default. I'll add another 30 seconds for a minute total for between the character and the stage selection. So if I actually come in here and set my characters and go to the next screen, you see I have 30 seconds because this is the stage selection. I won't pick my selection. I can move around all I want, but I won't pick it. We'll wait the 30 seconds, and then theoretically it should have the same effect as if I pick the random selection that I'm on here, that player 1 and 2 are on. It's basically going to pick a random stage, load into it. That is the thought. That's the goal. We'll see if it actually works in 3 seconds. There we go. And now it picked this stage and we're in. It's that simple. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You have free reign over all that stuff, so have fun with it. Do whatever you like. Whatever feels right, whatever looks the best for your game. No wrong answers here, just as long as it's all functional. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please subscribe. Does more for myself in the series than anything else you can do. I really appreciate it. Lets me know that I'm doing a good job. It just really helps me out. I want to give a huge, huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys so much for the love and support. I really, really appreciate it. If you had any issues with this episode or any of my episodes or any of my series really, feel free to join the Discord community. Be happy to help you out. Get any issues that you ran into solved, and it's completely free. Like I said, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.